ただいまご紹介いただきました久保と申します。このディスカッションの部分の司会を担当させていただきます。どうぞよろしくお願いいたします。いよいよトランプ政権発足であります。何が起こるかわからないという意味で、おそらく前代未聞の、あるいは日本で一時流行った言葉を使うと異次元の予測不可能性というんでしょうか。普通の大統領が少し政策を変えるというのは、ちょっと本当に次元の違う形でどういう外交政策を実践してくるか、本当に分かりにくいという感じがいたします。それはご本人自身もあまり詳しく外交について知らないのではないかと思われる節が結構ありますが、同時ににもかかわらず、あまり部下と長い時間をかけて政策を勉強するということもないような疑いがあります。本はあまり読まないみたいですし、どのくらい多分長いポリシーペーパーもきっと読んでくれないだろうと思います。で、その外交政策もこれまでの在来のこれまでのアメリカの国際主義的な、あるいは自由貿易主義的な政策と相当違う部分もあります。もちろん今指名が進んでいるその国務長官であるとか国防長官がすべての点でトランプ氏と政策が一致しているわけではないようで、そこがとりあえずは救いでありますが、しかしまだ決定の方式というのが、その外交政策を閣僚に任せるのか、それともホワイトハウスで集中的に管理するのか、あるいは夜中の3時のツイッターで本当にすぐひっくり返ってしまうのか、その辺もまだわからないところであります。こういう状況で今アジアの各国がどういう形で今アメリカを見ているか、アメリカとどう付き合おうとしているか、特に本日のサブタイトルにもありますけれども、リバランス政策の行方はどうなるのか、この辺についてご意見を伺えればというふうに思う次第であります。この辺あんまり心配しすぎも良くないかと思いますが、しかし他方で心配しなさすぎというのも危険であります。そのあたりもどういう形でアジアが見ているかということをこれから伺えればと思う次第であります。で、私の皆様から向かうと右側になりますけれども、このプログラムに印刷されている順で、まずは韓国のユン・ヨングハンさんからお話を伺い、その次にインドのラジャ・モハンさん、それからその次にタイのティティナン・ポンスダリックさん、それから日本を代表して添谷義秀さんにお話をお伺いし、で最後にアメリカを代表してというか、あるいはトランプ政権を代弁してということに多分ならないと思うんですけれども、アメリカの立場からハリー・ハーディングさんからコメントをいただければというふうに思う次第です。先ほどの総合司会の方からもありましたように、できれば時間に協力していただいて7分以内にお話をいただければ幸いです。それではまずはユンさんお願いできますでしょうか。
Thank you very much, Professor Kubo. It is my great pleasure to be here, and I would like to appreciate deeply for the efforts made by Sasakawa Peace Foundation and Asia Foundation, which made this meeting possible. 7 minutes. The professors usually have difficulties to keep time on making points brief, but I will try my best. We made 10 key policy recommendations. On 4 out of top 5 key recommendations, I found the Trump administration will likely to go exactly to the opposite directions. For example, first recommendation was maintain a robust, sustained, and consistent American presence in the Asia Pacific. His policy is oriented toward isolationism and withdrawal, emphasizing America's economic interest first. Second recommendation, support Asian regional architecture and institutions. He does not seem to like any kind of multilateral arrangement. Instead, he seemed to prefer bilateral transactions focusing on narrowly defined American interest. Third, ratify the TPP. Many people believe that TPP is already dead. The fourth, pursue a balanced approach toward China. We know what is going on in the last, a few months since the election of Donald Trump as U.S. President. By any means, I don't intend to discredit the hard work that we have done in the last several months. Actually, I'm sure our recommendations will turn out to be very relevant and prudent ones sooner or later, benefiting both Americans and the people living in other parts of the world. The issue seems to be what will happen in the meantime and how to manage them. And let me make a brief remarks related to the issues of U.S. isolationism and its possible implication for Northeast Asia. First, on the U.S. isolationist policy, the U.S. retreat from the Northeast Asian security matters and its resultant weakening of bilateral alliances here will destabilize political and economic environment in the region. Northeast Asia is unique in the sense that this region is ripe with so-called the security dilemma problem. And we don't have any effective multilateral institutional mechanisms for security cooperation as Europe or Southeast Asia does. And in this kind of situation, the US has been taking the important role of stabilizer in the last 7 decades. And I think we should not underestimate this important contribution made by US commitment in this region. If the US gives up this role by withdrawing its security commitment in Northeast Asia, the international relations will quickly destabilize. For example, if alliances weaken, Japan and South Korea will seriously consider, in my personal view, the nuclear option, which will make Northeast Asia a much more dangerous place. North Korea may misjudge and make provocation even more seriously with its strengthened nuclear and missile capability. There will be also an intensifying arms race among countries like China, Japan, South Korea, North Korea, or even Taiwan. And this will affect the economic environment in Northeast Asia quite negatively. And high tension in this security area will spill over into economic sphere and work against US economic interest, because worsening economic environment negatively influenced by negative security matters, security affairs in this region will reduce the demand for American goods and services. So this will be unintended consequence of US isolationist policy and possible withdrawal from its commitment in Northeast Asia. Briefly on the economic policy, protectionism will backfire. For example, immediately after the signing of the Smoot-Hawley Tariff Act in June 1930 by President Herbert Hoover, trading partners of the United States began to retaliate. And we know what happened after that. Every country suffered a lot. For example, the US trade has decreased by half. And that led to deepening economic depression, Great Depression. So I think it is meaningful for us to try to revive the spirit of free trade. And this is why I think it is meaningful also to revive the TPP, Trans-Pacific Alliance. Probably the reason for the job loss in the American manufacturing sector may be because of automation of production process rather than free trade. So the solution may be lying in effectively providing assistance for trade adjustment for workers there. Secondly, I'd like to focus on the implication of this change of American policy for countries like Japan or Northeast Asian countries. Japan or South Korea will face the challenge of widening discrepancies in foreign policy orientation between the United States and ourselves, I mean Japan or South Korea. U.S. approach is transnational, emphasizing the importance of economic interest, while the approach of Japan or South Korea tend to be geopolitically oriented, focusing on the importance of alliances or even values. So, I mean, how to harmonize this different foreign policy orientation, that will be a big task. But this will provide some opportunities for Japan. The retreat of the US from the Northeast Asian politics will provide Japan with wider room for more autonomous policies in international politics. The key issue will be how Japan will utilize this room for more autonomy. That is, toward which direction Japan will go in the future. In other words, what will be the purpose of the Japanese foreign policy in the era of Donald Trump? That seems to be the critical question to consider for Japan. For example, I think Japan can be a provider of international public good and exercise a constructive leadership role by trying to revive TPP. It seems to be certain that President Trump will desert TPP. If that happens, what Japan will do? Instead of giving up, Japan may try to cooperate with countries like New Zealand and try to revive the TPP even without American participation. Japan may even go further, trying to conclude Japan-EU free trade agreement or Japan-South Korea-China trilateral free trade agreements. This may sound a little idealistic, but I think that is the way Japan can fill the leadership vacuum left by the US withdrawal in a constructive manner. Finally, I'd like to comment on North Korea nuclear issue. International society has been trying hard in the last 2.5 decades to denuclearize North Korea, but actually the situation got worsened. Sooner or later, North Korea is supposed to be able to mount a miniaturized nuclear warhead on a long-range missile very soon. And we need some kind of comprehensive solution to this matter. Strategic patience pursued by President Obama was unfortunately not productive. It has not worked. Actually, North Korea used the interval for strengthening its nuclear and missile capability. And I think the US had better try to come up with a delicate policy mix of pressure and dialogue with North Korea. And after some time, after some period of international sanction, I think the US need to begin to talk with North Korea and try to find a comprehensive solution, including denuclearization and replacing the truce regime with a permanent peace regime. One thing is that peace treaty, the issue of peace treaty will be very sensitive issue. And there should be very close consultation between the United States and South Korean governments. And also the US and other international actors had better think about how to utilize domestic changes in North Korea as the result of marketization in the last 2 decades. For the purpose of persuading North Korea to comply with international norms. Thank you very much.
どうもありがとうございました。非常に面白い論点が含まれて、後でぜひ討論したいと思います。で、次はですね、私ちょっと先ほど間違えてしまったようですけども、タイのティチナン・ポンスダリックさんにお話をお願いしたいと思います。どうぞよろしくお願いします。
Thank you, Professor Kubo. Good afternoon to everyone. I would like to also thank the Asia Foundation, Sasakawa Peace Foundation for enabling us to be here today. I also want to thank my co-authors, co-chairs. It's always a pleasure to work with them. We had some discussions like this in Washington and now here. Time is very short. I know that we will be running behind. So ahead of this trip, I've written my presentation was written up and was published by the Nikkei Asian Review, which I think the Sasakawa Peace Foundation has kindly made some photocopies of, so you can look at that. But basically, I have a few points to say. First, Trump has not turned out to be the isolationist that we had feared. This is the longest presidential transition. You know, it's the same amount of time, but it feels like he's been the president already 6 months. But it's only been about 2 months. And it has been the most controversial transitional periods for U.S. presidential electoral cycle in recent memory. So this is a time of concern, a time of big questions about what will come next. So he's not an isolationist. He's actually a kind of an internationalist. He will engage, but we don't know how, under what conditions. It's almost kind of like a bit of an erratic, unpredictable internationalism. So it depends on him. This is something we have to grapple with. That's the first point. Second, Southeast Asia is between a rock and a hard place. So if Trump, he has a tough talking rhetoric, if he comes up empty, it is bad for Southeast Asia because China will be all over the region. China is already winning in Southeast Asia, along in the South China Sea. You can see in the South China Sea that China has, from 2012, in April, they took over Scarborough Shoal and subsequently a string of islands and reefs and rocks, and they made into artificial islands. These are theirs now to keep. They will keep them. Despite the ruling from the Permanent Court of Arbitration on July 12, 2016, overwhelmingly against China, disregarding China's historical claims and citing its environmental damage, degradation. But nonetheless, Beijing has ignored this landmark PCA ruling. And if you look at Southeast Asia, the Philippines actually has put it to the side. The Philippines, under newly elected President Rodrigo Duterte, has seen Southeast Asia for what it is. The US is not there. The outgoing President Barack Obama is very well liked. He's very popular, but his rebalance is finished. But Southeast Asia and Asia more broadly is still looking for rebalance. So if Trump comes up with a real rebalance, which means a more confrontational posture vis-a-vis China, backed up by force, by the ability, the willingness, the show of force, then Southeast Asia will also be against a rock. So, if he doesn't do anything, he's empty. We are in a difficult situation because China is going to dominate. It has been dominating. If he does come up with some substance to back up his rhetoric, then we will see growing tension between the US and China. So that's the second point. Southeast Asia is between a rock and a hard place. whether Trump comes up with substance to back up the rhetoric or whether he doesn't, like Obama. Third, I've been saying this for some time, that the U.S. does not have to always play the largest role, the leadership role. It can share this responsibility of the heavy lifting with other middle power allies, upper middle power ally like Japan, but to a lesser extent Australia. Japan's role is crucial, is critical in the region, but on its own it's not enough without the U.S. But the U.S. on its own, it doesn't have the resources, fiscal resources, and maybe the political will, and in the Trump case, maybe the predictability, the core principles behind the policy program. So this is a time for the U.S. to work more with middle power allies like Japan and to a lesser extent Australia to show up and rebalance Southeast Asia vis-a-vis China. Southeast Asian countries, that's the third point. Fourth point is that Southeast Asian countries are looking for that. You see that ASEAN has been divided mainly between maritime states and mainland. The ASEAN divisions were conspicuous from 2012 when it was unable to, the grouping was unable to issue a joint statement after a ministerial meeting. But since then, China can exercise a veto virtually whenever it wants by flexing its muscle through Cambodia, Laos, and Brunei to a lesser extent. And none of the other ASEAN countries would be willing to stand up to China. Certainly not the Philippines now, because the Philippines, they see the region for what it is. The US is not there. No one else can really take up that role. So it's really, to play a game, you have to go to Beijing, and that's what Duterte did. He went to Beijing, but after that he also came to Japan, to Tokyo. This was followed by Malaysia. Najib did the same thing, but they were all preceded by Thailand. The military government went to China, Beijing, and sought support. So China now has these ASEAN countries divided whenever it wants to, unable to come up with a single voice. So this is a time when I think in order for ASEAN to regroup and regain its footing, it needs the US back in play, but it doesn't have to be in dominance. It doesn't have to be always a leading role, but in close support, I think it has to have Japan and to a lesser extent Australia. So these are some of the main points. I think you will see going forward that we will have more tension no matter what happens. These tensions are going to challenge ASEAN's unity, centrality, cohesion, but so be it. This is the way it's going to be. My final point is that Japan has to up its tempo, increase its tempo. It's already doing a lot in mainland Southeast Asia along the Mekong River, the greater Mekong sub-region. But it has to increase the tempo a little bit because China now feels very secure. This is the backyard of southern China, the Mekong regions, mainland Southeast Asia. But if Japan increases its role in the mainland, it will increase the costs of China's belligerence in the maritime domain. So it's a matter of increasing the cost to the point that it can change behavior. The US still has to be back in play, and we hope that Trump will provide some predictability soon with a visible, reliable Asia policy team. But nevertheless, that will not be enough without Japan. Vice versa, Japan will not be enough without the US. So that's where Southeast Asia stands. Thank you.
トランプさんは必ずしも孤立主義ではないというところから始まって非常に興味深いお話だったと思います。それではインドのラジャ・モハンさん、どうぞよろしくお願いします。
Thank you, Professor Kubok. My colleagues have already covered much ground on the report on the current situation with the Trump incoming administration. What I plan to do is to limit myself to 3 sets of issues and present them to you. The first is we have 2 problems with the Americans. One is general one and one is a specific one with Mr. Trump. The general problem is this, that Americans, what they do inevitably affect the rest of the world and more so Asia. So but the fact is we don't have a vote in the US elections. So the fact is, whether you like Mr. Trump or not, that he's going to be the president of the United States come Friday, and we have to deal with that reality. That the choice of making leadership judgments is with the United States, and if Mr. Trump is the president, dealing with him is going to be our karma, shall we say, and that there's no escape from it. So next 4 years, if he's the president, we have to deal with the policies. The second problem specifically with Mr. Trump, I think in a very short period of time, in 1 year of his campaign, he's questioned what we've known to be some basic features of America's engagement with the world. This is really unprecedented in that sense in the post-war United States, that here is a leader, complete outsider, comes and challenges three core assumptions that all of us have made about the United States. What are these three core assumptions about the US that we've operated on? One is America is a land of immigrants that's open for outsiders to come and live in the United States. Probably the most open society in terms of its borders being open for others, whether to study, to work, or to eventually become citizens. Mr. Trump is saying he's going to severely restrict that. Whether it is a wall on the Rio Grande with the Mexicans, whether it is the limitations on Muslim migration, Muslims' entry into the US, that this is a strong conviction of the new administration that limiting immigration must be a key part of American approach. And I think that is going to be, in whatever form it comes, that's going to be reality that we have to deal with. The second aspect, I think, of the problem with him is the assumption that the US is the leader of globalization. That the US led the process of globalization since the end of the Second World War. What Trump is saying, he would like to deglobalize to some extent, to put it very simply. On the question of trade, that he said first day in office, he's going to do a lot of things, which includes tearing up some of the free trade agreement that the US has signed or force a renegotiation. And I think the reason that he has won with a narrow margin in some critical states of the US Rust Belt is his argument on trade. Is that argument that trade is bad for the Americans, and that the Americans had to pay a price for being open to imports from other countries. So therefore, some element of deglobalization is going to be part of what we're going to see in the United States, and we're going to deal with it. The third assumption that we've had historically was that the US will lead the political order in the international system, and from that, Mr. Trump is talking about some retrenchment, some pullback, whichever term you want to use, downsizing, retrenchment, restraint. The fact is there is going to be some readaptation of the US role in Eurasia, in Asia in general. So therefore, that's going to be the reality. We have to deal with it. So that's my first set of issues. The second is, what do we know about Mr. Trump so far? That general assumption is, in democracies, people say things in the elections, they don't really mean it. But once they come closer to power, they're going to say, look, is wink, wink, nod, nod, back to normal, business as usual. What Mr. Trump is saying, this is not business as usual. America is not going to go back to business as usual, and that we've seen him no backing off from free trade issues, no backing off from the wall, no backing off from Russian policy that he's talked about. That what we're seeing is then someone who's not backing off. So we got to assume however much his nominees might finish the policy up there in the US Congress, that he's stuck to the core principles that he outlined during last 1 year's campaign. And where does this lead the United States? Quite clearly, because he's challenging the core assumptions, we're going to see an America that's going to be deeply, deeply divided. Every single policy is going to be contested vigorously, some by his own colleagues in the Republican Party, some by others in the Democratic Party. Therefore, the US president, of course, we know, doesn't have a free hand in conduct of a lot of things. Therefore, the contestation within a divided government, all of us as outsiders we have to contend with the contestation domestically in the United States. There's no escaping from that. Therefore, it's not just Mr. Trump is unpredictable. Many in the Democrats are questioning his legitimacy as the president. Therefore, the argument within the United States of what is possible, what is not possible, is going to force us to be far more, shall we say, we got to be on our toes to deal with a very dynamic domestic political situation in the United States, and that's going to be a big challenge for all of us. That brings me to the third set of issues. What specifically does this mean for Asia and for Asians in the next 4 years? First, I think that there has to be some rearrangement of the principles of globalization. There's no escape from that. In any game, if the biggest boy says, look, I'm picking the bat and the ball and going home, the rest of the boys are going to say, no, let's, please stay back. I think it is a natural strength that the Americans have as the largest player in the game of global economy, that if he says, I'm going to turn my back, then I think others are going to be forced to adapt one way or another. How soon, how quickly, how willingly, that would be a fight. But the fact is that there is going to be there has to be a rearrangement, because there are losers from globalization in the United States, in the West. The idea in Asia that, look, the West is going to forever support globalization, irrespective of domestic politics, that assumption is not going to be sustainable. What we've seen in Brexit, what we've seen in this election, there are groups, there are forces in the West today who lost from globalization and the success of Asia. They're going to be mobilized. We've seen them being mobilized in 2016. They're not going to disappear in 2017 or in the next 4 years. And that's the reality we have to deal with, that therefore we must be prepared for some rearrangement. Because that's the advantage the strong players have in the international system. And I think some rearrangement of globalization and its principles. I'm not so sure the Chinese claim that they can replace the Americans. Mr. Xi Jinping was in Davos and he's talking about it, but others too, other Asian states too, will have to play a larger role in sustaining some core aspects of globalization and regionalism. Second, I think we must also be prepared and contribute to a reset in great power relations that's beginning to happen. This report, as many of us have assumed, that the US-China relationship is the most important relationship in the world. What we've seen in the last 2 months is there's somebody called Russia. Politically, the focus of the president has been to turn over, to talk about the importance of Russia and to politically reset the relationship with Russia and to contest the Chinese economic influence. This is very different from what we've known for the last 30 years. And therefore, any rearrangement of great power relations is going to be of importance for us, and I think we have to be prepared to deal with it. The third aspect of our challenge is going to be, it's not enough for Asian powers to complain about what the Americans do. I believe powers like Japan, India, or what my colleague Chittinan talked about, that the middle powers of Asia will have to take more responsibility, both for sustaining Asian regionalism, as well as for sustaining Asian security. You can't just expect the Americans to do all the heavy lifting and that you could criticize them when they go wrong. It's nice to have that luxury. We've had it for a long time, but now there is a duty on Japan, of India, of other countries to pay more, to do more, to take greater burdens within Asia of sustaining a regional security system. And I think that is going to be the biggest challenge, and my sense is, while the US might still rebalance, Mr. Trump has talked about expanding American Navy, taking a more muscular approach, but that there has to be some burden sharing. And that countries like Japan and India and others in the region will have to take larger portion of the burden. And that while hoping, pressing, and praying, if you will, that the Americans will retain a role in Asia, that we need to do more, and that will make it easier to ensure a reasonable balance of power in Asia. Thank you.
どうもありがとうございました。グローバリゼーションについて、特に西側は根本的に考え直す必要があるかもしれないと、非常に示唆的なお話もありました。それでは宗谷先生、お願いいたします。
慶応大学宗谷でございます。よろしくお願いします。ほとんど重要なポイントはもうカバーされたかと思いますので、同じことを別の言い方で 整理することになろうかと思います。ただ、最後に日本からの視点ということで、リポートの執筆者からの言及も多々ございましたので、私の試見を述べさせていただければと思います。まずトランプ現象ですが、私個人がどうこう言っていたというのは別にどうでもいいんですけれども、私がずっとその選挙中から感じていて、なおかつ機会があれば述べていたのは、どっちにかけろって言われれば、それはヒラリーにかけるんでしょうが、ただ問題はそのトランプが選ばれたとしても決して不思議ではないという、ですから選ばれる可能性はもちろんあるというそんなことをずっと言っておりました。でこれは申し上げるまでもなく、トランプ現象というのは必ずしもトランプ氏という個人に限られたことではなくて、おそらくもっと一般的な問題を抱えているということなんだろうと思います。でそのように申し上げれば、トランプ大統領が多分2期目にまたというのはほとんど想像でき、分かりません。トランプのことで予想すると間違えるというのが大体相場ですので、ただ2期目がないだろうと思うんですが、その後どういった大統領になったとしてもですね、今ここで議論しているテーマというのは、ポストトランプの時代にまで私は継続性連続性があるというように思ってますし、またそのように考えるべきなんだろうというように思います。でそれを前提にしてトランプという極めて強烈な個性のいわゆるスペシフィックな問題というのはもちろん多々あって、で我々はこれから4年間、中には4年間持たないんじゃないかという議論もあるみたいですが、付き合っていかなきゃいけないということなんだろうと思います。で予測不可能だということはもちろんその通りなんですが、ただなぜ予測不可能なのかということのその本質的なポイントというものはやはり押さえておく必要があるだろうと思います。で一つは改めて申し上げるまでもないことですけれども、トランプ氏というその強烈な個性をこの求心力とするその内向きのベクトルが強烈にアメリカに働き続けるという、そういう力学はトランプ大統領がトランプ氏である限り、そして大統領である限りやはり変わりようはないと思います。でこの前の上院でのその、国務長官その他の聴講会で、比較的そのまともなことを言っているというので胸をなで下ろした反応はもちろんあったわけですけれども、あれは若干うがった見方をすれば、言わなければその共和党多数の議会で承認を得られることはまず不可能ですので、おそらくそれはタクティカルなことであって、トランプ氏自身のこの考えというものはあの時は皆さんは自由に言ってくださいというようなことをツイートしていたわけですね。ですから今後はそういった意味でも予測不可能、ただしおそらく継続するだろうというのはやっぱりトランプ氏がトランプ氏であるということは変わりようがない。それからもう一つはこれはモハンさんもおっしゃったことですが、アメリカの国内がやっぱり非常に深刻に分裂をしていると。つまりトランプを求心力にするベクトルが働き続ける中で、それを抱えるアメリカの国内っていうものが非常に深刻に分裂をしているという、この状況も変わりようがないと思うんですね。でそうしますとそれゆえに予測不可能だということになるんだろうと思います。でただし我々の側からそれを見れば、あるいは国際社会全般から見れば、その我々に対する影響たるや絶大であることは言うまでもないわけで、そこで我々はちょっと一生懸命知恵を絞ろうとしているということだろうと思います。でそうしますとそれからもう一つトランプについてほぼ確実なのは、これはモハンさんもおっしゃいましたけれども、グローバリゼーションであるとか国際秩序であるとか、その国際システムをどのように構築していくという、そういう発想は見事のまでにゼロなわけですね。でしかしながらトランプ的な物事のやり方が国際システムに多大なる影響を与えることは間違いないという、そういう分かりにくさというものが 現実のものになるんだろうということ。それからもう一つ、国際システム的な観点から、そのトランプアプローチについて、一つ一般論的に言えることは、国際秩序運営というような発想がないということの、一種コロラリーだと思うんですが、それぞれの地域における地域大国の役割が、やはりその地域秩序を考えるときに決定的に重要になっていくと思います。で、ロシア、ヨーロッパとの関係におけるロシアの役割というものは、EU にとってみればそれは頭痛の種になるわけですけれども、トランプの対ロ政策の結果として、やはりロシア外交の自由度というものは高まるだろうと思いますし、アジア太平洋においては、中国との摩擦はいろんな意味で避けられないと思いますが、やはり中国のこのアジア秩序における外交的自由度というものは、やはり総合的に考えれば高まるんだろうと思います。で、そういったことが、おそらく我々が国際秩序の観点からトランプに対して言えることで、そうしますと、それに対して日本は、これは日本に限らないわけですけれども、日本はどう対応したらいいかというときに、我々の対応に、基本的に3つの反応が今起きていると思います。で、一つは、安倍外相が率先し、安倍首相が率先して行ったように、日米同盟の重要性を確認し、それをアメリカにできるだけ理解してもらうと。で、これは、日米同盟はアジア太平洋の秩序を支える公共財だという言い方を我々、長年してきたわけですが、そのことの意味はもちろん重要であり続けるし、またそれをアメリカに理解してもらうということが重要である。これは言うまでもないと思います。からもう一つの反応は、このトランプがやや地域秩序への関与というものを、そのシステムの運営という観点からはしてこないだろうという、それを一種チャンスとして捉えて、日本が自助努力をすべきであると。我々がその自前の戦略を考える好機にすべきだと、そういう議論も我が国では起きております。で、これも一般論としては、私は間違いではないと思います。日本はもっとできることはあるでしょうし、やるべきことは多々あると。で、3番目、これはティティタン先生もそれからモハンさんもおっしゃったわけですが、東アジア協力を再検討する、そういう重要なきっかけ、チャンスにすべきだという、ポイントですね。つまり、東アジアの地域秩序というものが、先ほど申し上げたように、一般論としては、やはり中国中心の力学が、良きにつけ、悪しきにつけ、大きくなるだろうという状況に対して、東アジア地域は、これは私の議論で言えば日本も含めてなんですが、国家が単独でそういった東アジア地域情勢に対応するということは、いずれの国の能力も超えるわけですね。で、これはもちろん日本に対しても同じであって、で、今日実はお二人の話を聞いていて、日本をミドルパワーというようにおっしゃっていて、私は非常に複雑な気持ちで聞いていたんですが、皆さんご承知かどうか、私はもう10年以上前からその議論をやってるんですけれども、その時のポイントは、その日本の戦略的照準というものは、やはり東アジアの国々との協力を日本が自前で作り上げていって、で、東アジア秩序のインフラをですね、そこで作っていくと。で、誤解を恐れずに概念的に申し上げれば、図式的に申し上げれば、やはりアメリカと中国というのは別格の大国として存在をしていて、でなおかつ米中関係というのは決定的に重要な戦略的関係だと。でそれを前提にすれば、日本を含めた他すべての東アジア諸国にとって中長期的な戦略的アジェンダは共通なのではないかと。つまり我々は共通の土台で中国を考え、アメリカを考え、米中関係を考えるという、それから我々の東アジア協力の東アジア諸国同士の協力を考える、簡単に言うと、そんな議論を私はもう10年以上前からやってるんですが、私から言えば、この今申し上げた3つの中で、最も新たな重要性を付与されているのは3番目だろうと思います。でただ、結論的に申し上げれば、この3つとも重要なんですね。この3つとも日本は組み合わせていくと、つまり日米同盟というものを、やはり地域の公共財として維持し続け、発展させる。それから日本の自助努力、もっとできることはもちろんまだあると思います。で、これもやる。 でただしこれは中国とこうなんか一対一で競争するための自助努力ではありえないというのがやはりここでは重要だと思います。で3番目の東アジア協力の重要性というものをやはりこれを私は戦略的な照準にしてそれに付与するような形での日米同盟自助努力というものを新しい戦略的なコンセプトとして我々が作り上げていくと、今東南アジアからの要請それからインドからの日本へのラブコール、これに対して我々が一定のその整合性を持った対応をすることができるのではないかと。でこれは究極的にはやはり対中戦略だと思います。でただここでのポイントは対中戦略は別にアメリカと組んで中国に立ち向かうということが必ずしも軸ではなくて東アジア協力を中長期的に組み上げるという、そういう戦略的な眼力を持ちながらそこにアメリカそれから日本の自助努力というものをこう組み上げていくというでつまり東アジアの国との協力が成立しなければですね日本がいくら中国と頑張ろうとしてもやっぱり限界はあるだろうと。そういうことです。でこのトランプ現象の現状っていうのはやはり私はそういうチャンスにすべきであってでそう考えればこういった日本にとっての要請は決して新しい問題ではなくてもうすでにもうオバマ時代からあるいはひょっとすればその前から始まっていてそれでこれがトランプ現象を経てポストトランプという時代に私は流れていくという、そういう日本側からの発想になりうるのではないかというようなことを思っておる次第でございます。
どうもありがとうございました。トランプ政権の出現というのが日本にとって、政策的にどう対応するかという点での、その政策的な挑戦であるだけでなくて、結構知的な挑戦でもある、あるいは日本の生き方の挑戦でもあるという、側面について触れたお話であったと思います。それでは最後になってしまい恐縮ですけれども、ハーディング教授からこれまでのお話を聞いた上でのコメントでも結構ですし、トランプ大統領を代弁してアメリカの今後のアメリカについてお話をしてくださっても結構ですし、コメントをいただければと思います。
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and good afternoon, everyone. I am Harry Harding. I have a dual appointment, University of Virginia professor, but I actually am spending more time, 8 months of the year, in Hong Kong, where I'm a visiting professor at the Hong Kong University of Science and Technology. And I say that because I certainly cannot speak for the Trump administration or even for the Washington policy community because I don't spend that much time there anymore. I am a more distant observer. But I think that sometimes is good, because just as we've heard some wonderfully important and insightful comments from our participants, our panelists today, precisely because they have that broader perspective, perhaps I can bring some further elements of perspective to our discussion. As John Brandon has said, my role in this project was to be the co-author, along with Ellen Lapson, of the chapter called U.S. Views on the American Role in Asia. In fact, what we did was really not to summarize American views, but to provide as objectively as we could a summary of what our various Asian collaborators had told us about the region and about their views of American policy, and on that basis to come up with some recommendations for whichever new administration it was. As John has said, I want to underline this. We did not know who the next president would be. Most of us probably, like everyone else, assumed it would be Hillary Clinton. But we very carefully kept an open mind as we drafted the report and tried to make it of general utility to whichever administration was going to come into office in January. I have to admit that, as is often the case, our recommendations, although I think are sound, I hope you agree, are also very vague. And we have to know that's a constant problem of general policy recommendations. The devil is in the details. We do not provide very many details. We may be willing, all of us, to give you some answers about what we think the details might be, but they're not in the report that is before you. So with that as a kind of a qualification or a qualifier, let me address the big issue, which is how should we think about and how should we approach the incoming Trump administration. I think that beginning with Mr. Tanaka and Mr. Kubo, we really got the best advice up front. And that is we need to acknowledge that we don't know. That in many ways, this is an unpredictable new administration because there are so many contradictory statements that are made. Mr. Trump has contradicted himself often. The nominees for high positions have differed with him and differed with each other. And many of his statements, I said our recommendations are vague, his tweets are even vaguer. So we don't know what he has in mind, and we should acknowledge that. And as I'll say in more detail in just a second, we should also be very careful at this stage about putting much confidence in what others predict Mr. Trump is going to do. We simply do not know. My advice in that context would be the following. As some wise people have already said in analyzing the election itself, we should not necessarily take literally, take seriously every word he says or tweets, but we should basically take him seriously and take his attitudes seriously. And why is that? Because he is not alone. He's not alone in the United States, and he's not alone in the world. That there is a growing, a mounting backlash against globalization. We talked at dinner last night about a mounting backlash about some aspects of technological innovation. There's a backlash against elites, political elites, who are seen as too distant from and indeed disdainful of the large sectors of the population who are troubled by the consequences of globalization. So that if we think that Trump is simply a fluke that will go away with time, we could be very seriously mistaken and disappointed. As I say, he is not alone either in the United States or in the world. So we should take his attitudes seriously, even if we cannot be confident as to what specific policies he is going to come up with. Should we be concerned? I think Professor Kubo put it very well. We should be concerned, but not excessively so. And because so many people do take his words too literally, I think that there is a tendency to exaggerate what the possibilities are going to be. I would agree that Trump is not an isolationist, but I would also agree that he represents a critique of so many assumptions that have underlain American foreign policy, including towards Asia, in the entirety of the post-World War II era. And again, we have to take that seriously, even though we don't know what the concrete policies are going to be as he thinks about these. He is also not alone in the fact that many people also agree that many of the policies, not just of Mr. Obama, but of several past administrations, have not had satisfactory results. Our Korea policy has not worked. North Korea policy has not worked. Our China policy, many people think, has not worked. Our approach to globalization should always be deeper, faster, going further. That has produced huge problems. And so he is representing many people when, as vague as his conclusions are, he's asking questions about the conventional wisdom that I would have to say I think need to be raised, but then very, very thoughtfully and rationally addressed. As we look forward, what are some of the things that I think we need to look at? He has been able to be vague and contradictory so far precisely because he's not in office yet. As he and his appointees take office, they will be forced to become more specific in what they say and what they do. And I dare say that there will be several major powers, most notably China and Russia, who will be pushing, testing, to try to gain greater clarity. So what should we be looking for, especially here in Japan, but also in the United States as elsewhere? Let me tick off some of the most important things to look for without making predictions as to what we will see. and then conclude with, I think, for me, a very important conclusion about the relationship between looking forward and this meeting today. First, what should we look forward to? We need to look to see, most obviously, how Trump is going to deal with China. Not only with regard to the South China Sea, but also with regard to the relationship as a whole. Other aspects of the security relationship, and certainly the economic relationship, not just trade, but also investment. And I would make one prediction, and that is that investment is going to be an increasing focus. When we talk about freer trade, that is, or fairer trade, that's only one half of it, and I think it's a shrinking half at that. What is equally important is investment, and here I think the word is going to be, the adjective is not going to be freer or even fairer, but more reciprocal. I think that my prediction would be that the Trump administration is going to increasingly want to ask, if we open opportunities to investment for Chinese in the United States, are comparable opportunities open to foreigners in China? And so far the answer is no. But Xi Jinping, on the eve of his visit to Davos, did apparently authorize a statement that indicated that China would open up more opportunities for foreign investment, which suggests that they are aware that this is going to be an increasing complaint. Obviously, what Trump says about Taiwan and does with Taiwan will be a particularly sensitive issue. Without going into the details right now, I do think that some aspects, details of the One China policy need to be reconsidered. I was struck by the commentary in the Japan Times this morning evaluating Ambassador Carolyn Kennedy's term here as ambassador, which basically said that she was great at public relations. I don't know how many of you would agree with this rather sharp commentary. Very good at public relations, but did not really master the details of policy. And as a result, American policy towards Japan has been on autopilot for the last 4 years, is what the article said. Whether or not that's fair, certainly it's not her personal responsibility, whether or not that's a fair comment about the United States, I would simply say no country's foreign policy can be on autopilot anymore. The world is so complex and changing so rapidly that policies need to be reconsidered. And inconvenient truths, to borrow that wonderful phrase from Al Gore about climate change, inconvenient truths must be acknowledged to be true. And then the conclusions reached. And I think that there are some aspects of our policy towards Taiwan that reflect that need. If you're interested, you can write it down and ask me during the Q&A period. So that the examples of this include North Korea, where our policy has failed, I think, and we say it has to be reconsidered. The role that we see for Russia in Asia, if any, needs to be very, very carefully looked at. Is Trump going to try to play a Russia card against China, for example? Is he going to try to work cooperatively with Russia and other regional powers on key issues in Asia, and what will they be? So that's another area where we have to look at very, very carefully. And then finally, the thing to look at that is in our report, but I really want to highlight it here because no one has mentioned it yet, and I think it's very important. One of our recommendations that unfortunately did not make the top, what was it, 5 or 10 list, is that the United States has to get its act together. Our political system is showing very serious strains. Some would say it's become dysfunctional because of the degree of polarization, and for a variety of reasons, ranging from America's soft power in promoting democracy to its ability to deal with specific issues, really require some putting our house in order politically. Unfortunately, we do not seem to be off to a very good start under the new Trump administration, as the growing tensions and confrontations and mutual criticisms between the Trump administration incoming and the Democrats are becoming more and more serious. In addition, we have to get our economic house in order. Yes, we are slowly recovering from the great financial crisis, the global financial crisis. And many observers take great pleasure in announcing the aggregate numbers in terms of increases in average wage or increase in average growth rate. But our problem, as I implied earlier, is that we have, elites have, leaders have, ignored the distributional aspects of all of this. And we need to deal with those problems because otherwise the kind of populist and indeed protectionist, let's put those two words together, policies that we all are worried about will not die away. Instead, they will get a new lease on life. So we need, in the United States, to get our act together politically and economically, and whether or not we do that, we need to monitor. And that leads me to my last point, and it's a recommendation to the Sasakawa Peace Foundation, the Asia Foundation, and other interested organizations. Let this not be the last of these meetings. I think that it's very important that we continue to monitor the situation precisely because there is so much uncertainty and the situation is so volatile. So we will need to very carefully discuss developments as they occur with each other, to exchange views about what is happening and what the implications for the region and the rest of the world are. In so doing, I would caution you about one development that I am worried about happening. I already see it, and that is the following. In conditions of uncertainty, and we are certainly in one of those, and complexity, observers often are grasping at the latest bit of news to try to get clarity and greater certainty. One of my colleagues at the University of Virginia has actually written about this for financial markets. And he says that uncertainty makes financial markets much more volatile, and that asset managers are desperate to find what new bit of information will give greater clarity and usually exaggerate how much clarity the latest news creates. So I would caution us in the meantime, while we look at all of these important developments as they unfold, not to exaggerate. And I think several of our panelists today were already sounded that note of caution. Starting with Professor Kubo, we should be concerned but not excessively concerned. If we exaggerate things, whether it's past statements or new bits of news, we run the risk of making the situation more complicated than it needs to be. So we don't know what's going to happen. We need to monitor it very carefully. We need to ask ourselves what dimensions are most important. And then finally, we need to have continuing ways of having this kind of opportunity to exchange views on the significance of what has happened and to draw the implications for the region and the rest of the world. Thank you.
どうもありがとうございました。我々と一緒に何が起こるかわからない悩みを共有してくれて非常に嬉しい限りです。で私の方で少し、コメントらしいものをさせていただいて、でそれについて少し、選択的に、短くお答えいただければと思います。私としてはですね、最初ですね、冒頭に申し上げたことで、今ハーディング、教授が触れてくださったことですけれども、例えば日本としてアメリカの大統領新しく生まれるたびに、心配しすぎた例もあるし、心配しなさすぎた例もある。例えば1980年にレーガン大統領が登場したときに、この大統領は非常にタカ派の大統領で大丈夫だろうかというふうに、随分日本のメディアは心配したわけですが、それほど心配する必要はなかったのかもしれません。逆に1968年にニクソン氏が当選したときに、その時ニクソン大統領による訪中は全く予想できませんでしたし、でそういう意味ではもう少し、そういうことを日本は心配すべきだったのかもしれなかった。あるいは1992年にクリントン大統領が、当選した時ですけれども、その後に、あれほどかなり厳しい、貿易摩擦が日米交渉が起きるということは予想できなかったと思います。そういう意味ではもう少し心配しておけばよかったということになるんだろうと思います。でそこで韓国、タイ、インドの そのパネリストからは、あんまり100年200年戻ってもあんまりこう生産的でないかもしれません。過去30年50年とかでいかがでしょうか。それぞれの国でアメリカの大統領政権交代の時に今までこう心配しすぎた例、心配しなさすぎた例、こういうのを比較して、その中で今回のトランプ政権とはどのくらいのところに位置づけることができるのか、という形で過去のそれぞれの国が経験した例から少し話をするとどういうことになるか、どういう形でトランプ政権の登場を評価できるか、このあたり、もしお考えがあれば伺えればと思います。それからアメリカの今後についてですが、ハーディング教授が触れてくださったように、私もトランプ現象、あるいはトランプさんの当選というのは必ずしも古くまぐれではなくて、それなりの根拠があるというふうに感じています。で、今回の選挙では、例えば共和党から明確に国際主義でないトランプさんのような候補が指名されたということは結構やっぱり驚きです。1945年以降、共和党の大統領候補というのは基本的に国際主義であって自由貿易主義であった。しかし、そうじゃない人が当選した。それから今回、二大政党の候補者が2人とも保護貿易主義的な立場で選挙戦を戦ったというのも、1945年以降のアメリカの大統領選挙では初めてではないかなという気がします。そういう意味で、今回の選挙というのはアメリカの中長期的な変化を意味するんだろうか、あるいはそんなに心配する必要がないのかということですね。特に共和党の変化という点でいうと、トランプ氏がこうやれば共和党の指名を取れるんだということを示したと。で、彼がこれまでの共和党の候補と違う点は、不法移民についてかなり過激なレトリックを使い、で保護貿易主義を訴え、でやや孤立主義的な政策を訴えるという、この3点セットが非常に効果的だったと思われるわけですが、そうするとその後に続く候補者というのが4年後8年後また出てくるのではないか。そうするとそれは最終的にアメリカの外交安全保障政策の中長期的な転換に行き着いてしまうのではないかという懸念にもなるわけですが、その辺についてどうお考えであるかということです。それから3つ目は日本の生き方として、宗谷先生が触れてくださいましたけど、日本ではトランプ当選で結構意外な人が喜んでいてですね、非常にやっぱりアメリカの基地がない方がいいと思っている人は結構トランプ当選で日本の基地がなくなると思っている人がいるので、喜んでいる人がいます。それから核武装をしろというふうにトランプさんが言ったということで、じゃあということで乗ろうという人もいるんですが、ただこれは非常に少数だと思います。ユン教授が日韓の核武装の可能性に触れましたけど、おそらく日本が核武装する可能性は極めて低いというふうに思います。ただ日本の生き方として日米安保をこのままやっぱり維持したいという人が大勢でありながら、しかしもっとやることがあるということと、それから確かに宗谷先生がおっしゃったようにもっと広げるということで、多分宗谷先生のお話は韓国中国というのは中心だろうと思いますが、おそらくそこは違う方向、例えばフィリピンであるとかベトナムであるとか、まさに東南アジアの方ともっと広げる、オーストラリアやインドと広げるという、そこにアクセントがある議論もあるかと思います。その辺日本としてどういうふうに生きることが期待されているか、このあたりについてそれぞれでですね、全部3つ答えるとき多分時間がなくなってしまうので、どれか1つについて多分1分か1分半ぐらいで何か少しコメントをいただき、でその後オーディエンスからのご質問というふうにしていきたいと思います。最初はユンさんから、あるいは日本と韓国で難しい問題を抱えていて、で例えば慰安婦の問題というのはオバマ政権も相当関与して、アメリカも関与して、日韓が結構和解しようとした部分もあるので、トランプ政権の不確実性があるとき、日本と韓国はあんまり喧嘩している場合ではないという面もあるかと思いますので、その辺について触れていただいても結構です。ということで、お一人どれか一つ質問を選んでいただいて、で短めにお答えいただければと思います。どうぞユンさんから。
Thank you very much. at the time of President Jimmy Carter, he tried to withdraw American troops from South Korea, and it caused great concern both in the United States and South Korea. But actually, domestic political institutions inside the US government could persuade him not to do so. So how effectively, for example, parties or Congress or public opinion leader or mass media in the US politics will, check whether we'll check President Donald Trump's policymaking on security matters or relationship with Northeast Asian allies. That will be the important factor that we have to look at in the future. Regarding Korea-Japan relationship, I think it is important for political leaders in both countries to try to improve the relationship from a positive and proactive perspective. We are facing common threats like North Korea, and to respond in an effective manner, we need a strong security alliance or security cooperative relationship between two countries. So I think a forward-looking attitude will be very important. In that regard, I think historical issue worked against building that kind of constructive, future-oriented relationship. I think probably Japanese government leaders can do more in removing that kind of historical baggage and establishing more future-oriented, productive relationship in bilateral relationship.
Okay, thank you. I would just be less than 1 minute because I want to, I think we should be keen to hear from the audience the questions, and I think we have a strict timeline to get back to move to the airport. First, Trump is no Reagan. Trump is not even Nixon on several fronts. Personally, he doesn't have the kind of experience in politics. His temperament is very different, I think, from Reagan, even Nixon. And then, the global system during Nixon, Reagan, and the post-war, post-Second World War liberal order was still on the ascent, was entrenched. Now it's unraveled. And he comes up at a time when the global order is coming loose at the seams, and there's nothing to replace it with. So it's a very, very unstable mix. Technology, American society is very polarized, and it's also further driven, polarization driven by technology and all these kinds of social media. Information is going around, so-called fake news and so on. There's a silver lining, maybe, possibly, the US politics will get, so one way to answer your question is imagine 4 years from now, what would Trump look like? It is possible the Republican Party is being contested now. Trump doesn't have control of it, that the big dignitaries, established elites within the party don't accept him. There will be a struggle within the Republican Party. If he wins, it'll go one way. If he doesn't, maybe there will be a realignment in the Republican Party, and maybe he will be someone, a catalyst that actually narrows that polarization. On Japan-US, I think the security alliance should definitely be maintained, maybe even expanded to an extent, but it has to be realigned. I think Japan, within that alliance structure, Japan has to take a more proactive, assertive role, and the US has to be willing to allow it.
I think very briefly, I would agree with Titin on that. While Trump has been a very divisive political personality, he also has an opportunity, I think, to triangulate the politics within the US. On trade issues, a large number of Democrats largely have similar sentiments on protectionism. On infrastructure spending, again, a large number of liberal Democrats would like to see a more active government. And similarly, a more restrained foreign policy that you could actually imagine him constructing, but then provided, of course, the politically it is more palatable to a large number of people. So that's one part. Second, on Japan, my sense is that countries like India, I mean, I think looking eagerly to strengthen their partnership with Japan. Because I think it's no longer a question of Japan taking more responsibility, because if we don't, it's our duty now for the middle powers, for Asian powers, that you got to step up to the plate. So I would see this actually, I agree with Professor Soera that, look, it's an opportunity, and I think history won't forgive us that if we just leave it to the Americans and the Chinese to run this part of the world, we need to do more. How we do it is what we need to have more consultations.
であとソヤさんには参加者の方からですね一つ、ご質問が来ています。で、トランプ、新大統領は、日本はもっと貢献しろと言っているということで、これまでの日本の専守防衛、個別的自衛権の範囲の協力でいいのか、それとももう少し協力が、必要ではないかというふうにこの方は言っていらっしゃいますが、ソヤ先生はどうお考えですかという質問もあります。
じゃあ今の質問から他の喋ってると忘れちゃうかもしれませんので、私は一昨年の安保法制で、去年か一昨年ですよね。安保法制でかなり日本の法的な体系は整ったと思います。で、集団的自衛権の問題っていうのが大きく騒がれ、これは私誤解を恐れずに言えば安倍首相の個人的アジェンダだというふうに思ってますが、それ以外にもいわゆる日米防衛協力のためのガイドラインですね、これは基本的に後方支援ですが、それに関係する領域での新しい法制ができて、で今や日本はアメリカだけではなくて、いわゆる友好国に対しても従来は日米のフレームワークであった後方支援ができるようになったわけですね。ですから例えば最悪のシナリオ、朝鮮での軍事紛争が起きた場合に、法的には日本は韓国への後方支援もできるようになっているわけです。でただそれを現実に動かすということが実は問題であって、そこで政治であるとか日韓関係の運営ということが法制で準備したことを実施する前提で動いていないというのが、私は実は本質的な問題だと思っています。それから国際安全保障協力については今南スーダンでの駆けつけ警護の議論がありますけれども、これが第3の領域ですね。でそれから第1の領域で集団的自衛権を日本の存立危機事態のケースで行使できるというようにしたわけで、そうしますと、これも朝鮮半島有事が起きれば、これ明らかに日本の存立危機事態ですから、その時に日本は集団的自衛権も行使できるんですね、もう法的には。でこれはつまり後方支援じゃなくて、自衛隊がアメリカや韓国と一緒に戦うっていう話です。でただこれは法律はできたけれども、そういう前提での議論っていうのは聞いたことがありませんし、その前提での日韓の協力を進めようという機運すらない。でそういう意味ではこれは安倍さんがやりたかったからやったことだっていうのが私の結論で、必ずしもそれが現実の世界との親和性を意識して有効に活用するという戦略論になっていない。ですから私は法的にはもうかなりできることは整備できたと思います。で問題はそれを日本のより広い地域的な戦略図式の中でどう使うのかというより本質的な議論につながっていないというところが問題だと思っています。でそれは私久保さんからの質問で簡単にお答えしようと思っていたことと関連するんですが、東アジア地域協力がなぜ重要かというときに、韓国がなぜ重要かっていうのは今申し上げたようなことももちろんあります。でそれから韓国と日本が本当の意味でのこの同じようなアジェンダで同じような地域秩序感を持って協力ができるようになれば、私は東アジアの国際政治にもパラダイムシフトが起きると思ってますので、これは究極的な私は到達点として意識しているというのが私のフレームワークです。でただ現実にはもちろんそこから遠ざかっているというのが現実であることは改めて申し上げるまでもない。ですから私から言えば非常に残念だということになります。それから中国、韓国が中心かという久保さんの質問ですが、私はむしろそうではない 例えばオーストラリアとの関係は、熊さんもおっしゃったように、日本にとっては決定的に大事ですが、ただこれは、冒頭申し上げたように、その中国への対抗戦略というコンテクストでオーストラリアを語るというのは、私はその、コンセプトとしては動かないだろうと思います。オーストラリア自身が尻込みをするわけですね、そういうコンセプトが前面に出ればですね。でそこでいわゆる典型的なミドルパワー協力的なコンセプトがやはり重要になるんだろうと思うんですが、そのために日本とオーストラリアはもうすでにアクサーですね、アクイジション&クロスサービシングアグリーメント、これをもう持ってるわけですね。ですから日豪のアクサっていうのはもう典型的なミドルパワー軍事協力で、伝統的なバランスオブパワーの要素はゼロなわけですね。それから韓国とオーストラリアも実は同じような総合的な安全保障協力のフレームワークを持ってます。イ・ミョンバク大統領の時にできてます。でそうすると日韓の間でもアクサの話というのは一時期ありました。で日韓のアクサができると、日韓豪のアクサのトライラテラルの形ができるのではないかというのが、私の一つの具体的提案なんですが、そういった方向でその東アジア協力が出来上がっていくと、やはり相当景色は変わってくるだろうと。それでそこに東南アジアももちろん日本の役割ということをおっしゃってますが、ご承知のように ASEAN というのはやはりコンセンサスを前提にしないと機能しない組織になってますので、ただそれがまた ASEAN の弱点でもあって、コンセンサスを重視せざるを得ないというところに中国がつけ込んできて、ASEAN が機能しないという現実になっているわけですね。でその時にやはり日本としてもその ASEAN との協力を深める時に、やっぱそこの ASEAN が機能する原点というものは忘れてはならないんだろうと思います。でよもやその ASEAN の分裂を助長するような対応を日本がやるというのは、ASEAN 戦略として私は間違っていると思ってまして、でそういった意味でその中国戦略を意識して一本釣りをするかのように中国と問題を抱えている国との戦略的提携を深めるというのは、それ自体は悪くはありませんけれども、そのことが今申し上げた ASEAN 政策の原点との関係においてどういう意味を持つのかというところにもきちんと配慮をして ASEAN との関係を進めていくということが大事なんだろうと思っています。一時期ケビン・ラッドオーストラリア首相がアジア太平洋共同体というコンセプトをぶち上げて、で ASEAN を一本釣りしようとしたんですね、シンガポールとかインドネシア。で私はたまたまラッド首相主催の第1回目のトラック2のシドニーの会議に出る機会があったんですが、もう ASEAN の人たちの反発たるや、もう頭から湯気が出るような猛烈な強烈な反発をしてました。でですからその前提での ASEAN 政策っていうのがやっぱり根底にあった上で、例えばベトナムとかインドネシアとかっていうところとの関係を組み上げるという、そういうなんて言うんでしょうね、深さといいますか、そういうことが求められる。でこれを総括的に言えば、やはり図らずもお二人の方がおっしゃったように、やっぱコンセプトとしては米中の狭間にいるアジアの国々のミドルパワー協力ということになるんだろうと私は未だに思います。でただそれでもって中国を牽制することは無理ですので、ただこれもティタナンさんがおっしゃっていますけども、中国が壊そうとしたらそのコストを高めるっていう、多分それが当面のそのことの意味なんだろうと思うんですね。中国が壊すことのコストを高めていくという形で協力を進めると。すみません、長くなりました。
それではハリー・ハーディングさんで私のコメントに対する答えでも結構ですが、2つオーディエンスから質問が来ています。一つは南シナ海のスプラトリー・アイランズにおける中国による島の建設、軍事基地化を我々はロールバック、巻き返すことができるんだろうか。How can we roll back the construction and militarization of the Spratly Islands in the South China Sea? This is a question for you. それからもう一つは、日露平和条約交渉におけるアメリカの役割について、オバマ政権は、日露の、交渉にやや、スケプティカル、懐疑的であったけれども、トランプ政権は違ってくるのか、どのくらいのことが期待できるのか、そういう質問も来て おります。残り時間あまりありませんけれども、お答えできる範囲で、お答えいただければと思います。
Thank you, Professor Kubo. Let me respond very briefly to these questions and then make one final point. This related to a question you posed earlier. Can we roll back the creation of the artificial islands in the South China Sea? No. The Chinese have presented a fait accompli. That's very difficult to deal with. I think that ideas about blockading the islands are not feasible. They're very, very risky. What we could conceivably do is to try to negotiate with the Chinese on limiting the degree to which military forces and weapon systems are stationed there. But the question is, what would be the quid pro quo that the Chinese would want, that we would agree to provide? With regard to the Japan-Russia negotiations, I just don't know enough to answer that. I think, again, as in all of these negotiations or bargains that have been envisioned, the devil is in the details. What would be the nature of that peace agreement? What would Japan give? What would it get? What would Russia give? What would it get? And so I think that without knowing what the details would be, it's hard for me to speculate on what the reaction in the United States would be. One last point about surprises. This is what Professor Kubo asked about. Of course there will be surprises, especially when administrations turn over. That was, in fact, the structural theme of Ellen and my contribution. There's a special degree of uncertainty this year because of the rise of relatively extreme or unusual positions, both from Trump and from Bernie Sanders, and the fact that there would be a change in president because Mr. Obama could not run again. So, of course, there will be surprises. But let me underscore something we've hinted at, but I want to make explicit. This is not the only major uncertainty in the region or in the world. And I worry that we are not only focused too much on individual statements by Mr. Trump, we're too focused on Mr. Trump, period. If we look at the rest of the region, we see new leaders in Taiwan. We assume there will be a new leader in South Korea soon. There will be a new leader in Hong Kong. There will be a bunch of new leaders, although not a change expected in the paramount leader in China. And there are all kinds of other questions about cross-border and non-conventional security issues. So Trump is not the only uncertainty. The U.S. will not be the only source of surprise. And we have to be alert to all of the changes that could pose both challenges and opportunities.
どうもありがとうございました。まだまだ議論したいこと、まだまだ伺いたいこと、私自身もありますし、参加者の方もたくさんあるかと思いますが、そろそろ時間となってしまいました。参加者の多くは、パネリストの多くは、この後すぐに飛行機に乗らなければいけないということで、これ以上ちょっと延長することができないのをお許しいただければと思います。皆さんどうもありがとうございました。これからクロージングステートメントがございます。
はい。登壇者の皆様どうもありがとうございました。皆様今一度登壇者の皆様に大きな拍手をお送りください。